Over the last year and a half, there have been two constants in my life. The inescapable weight of the ongoing mass casualty event we are all trying to survive, and the video game Destiny 2. Those first few months are a total blur of watching case counts rise, seeing bodies overflow into refrigerated trucks, and retreating into the dark, cold void of digital space. We were playing a decent amount of Destiny 2 before the pandemic, but since the world got turned on its head, it's become a safe place to touch base with friends and put the latest bad news out of our minds for at least a little while. Destiny 2 is a fascinating game. It's been known as a mindless grindfest, a best-in-class first-person shooter, and a nearly boundless space opera that is great, or terrible, or just okay, depending on who you ask and what expansion just came out. It also contains a staggering amount of subtle world-building. Sometimes you can play for years before realizing that your favorite gun is a reference to a character from antiquity, a concept in computer programming, or an ancient worm god that quietly calls for blood while you blow the enemies of humanity into tiny pieces. The Ace of Spades hand cannon is one of my favorite weapons in Destiny. It's bequeathed to the player by the deceased Hunter Vanguard Cade 6, and its signature perk is called Memento Mori. Once it's activated, it gives you a few powerful shots when you reload after killing an enemy. It's also a solemn reminder that everyone you will ever know will one day eventually die. I know that's a lot to take in, but Halloween is as good a time as any to get a little grim. After nearly 2 years of uncertainty and sickness and death, contemplating our own mortality is unavoidable, so we might as well dive in headfirst and swim together through the sea of existential dread. Memento Mori roughly translates from Latin to remember that you will die. The concept pops up in many philosophical and religious traditions around the world. In one of his dialogues, Plato described philosophy as a whole as about nothing else but dying and being dead. Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor and adherent to the philosophical school of Stoicism, once wrote to himself, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." In Psalm 90 of the Old Testament, Moses prays to God, hoping that he will eventually teach humanity to number our days that we may get a heart of wisdom. This call for greater mindfulness about death has also been expressed visually through art and cultural tradition around the world. In Vanitas, a style of art which began during the 16th century in the Netherlands, macabre imagery is often contrasted with beautiful, vibrant, or living things to remind the viewer that the line between life and death is so very thin. Paintings like Still Life with a Skull by Philippe de Champagne, which places a blooming tulip alongside a human skull in an hourglass, remind us that the only thing separating the fleeting beauty of life from the eventual decay of death is the inevitable passage of time. The celebration of Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, is a tradition with aesthetic ties reminding us that death binds us together. Ofrendas, which are altars filled with reminders of the people we've lost, the things they loved in life, and colorful representations of death made manifest, bring us a little closer to those who have gone before us. The beautiful rituals of Dia de los Muertos can help us find some joy in our inevitable passing. Their dark beauty reminds us to treasure both the people we miss dearly and those who are still with us whenever we can. Each October, Destiny 2 features an event called the Festival of the Lost, described in-game as
a holiday about death and loss, but also hidden identities, beautiful lanterns, and candy.
The first part of that description is pretty thin in practice. It's a Halloween Day of the Dead stand-in represented by a bunch of cool-looking stuff draped across public spaces in the game. It's a shallowly themed excuse to pick up slightly different quests in a well-decorated version of the tower. By comparison, the Ace of Spades and its reference to death are part of a story that actually has a little bit of pathos. The Forsaken expansion was about Cade 6 being killed in cold blood, and the player's subsequent quest to avenge him. Hunting down his killers and reclaiming his signature weapon actually carried some weight. It was a straightforward revenge story that stood out among Destiny's other content by centering itself around personal loss.
I'm coming home, Ace.
And it provided the game with an emotional impact that it's usually pretty short on. Bungie recently announced that they are taking the Forsaken campaign out of the game next February. Development-wise, this makes total sense. You can't keep building new stuff while maintaining all the old stuff forever. The people working on Destiny have shown they can put out new content regularly that is usually functionally satisfying. But I will be sad to see the emotional vacuum this leaves within the game. Acquiring Ace was a cathartic achievement that gave closure to that story. It gave the player a narrative attachment to that weapon that almost all other loot in Destiny lacks. In a universe whose heroes are almost indestructible, it confronted players briefly with the unavoidable reality of death. Forsaken might be going away, but I hope it's not the last time we see personal loss directly represented as part of the core narrative of Destiny 2.
All humans are aware of death, so we're all a little bit sad. All the time.
But all this imagery is meant to do more than just remind you that your pile of leftover parts will be buried in the cold ground until what's left of you is swallowed by a massive earthquake or casually paved over to make room for a new strip mall. Whether you've lost someone you love or know someone who has, the pandemic has irrevocably shifted the foundation of everyone who has survived it. Even if it's just upset your daily routine or shredded some long-term plans, your life is very different now than it was before millions of other people unexpectedly began to lose theirs. Remembering that your time is fleeting is a valuable tool. You can use it to help you decide what you really want out of the life you have. I want to avoid pointless meetings and tedious busy work whenever possible. I want to stop letting a relentless daily grind determine most of who I am. I want to be there for my family. I want to support my friends, and I want to finish cool projects that I've put my whole heart into. I want to make video games with my wife, and occasionally make videos about things that I think are important or interesting. At first glance, video games can feel like a waste of time. I've come to reevaluate my relationship with them, too. I just don't have as much time to play games as I used to, but the time I spare for them now is usually spent laughing and catching up with friends while we fight our way across the solar system. After everything we've all been through, even as this crisis continues to evolve around us, that seems like a good way to spend at least some of the limited time I have. If you stuck around and watched this whole thing, I just wanted to thank you for hanging out all the way through to the end. I also wanted to give a shout out to the DIA for their wonderful exposition on Dia de los Muertos. I got some of the footage for this video there, and it's a really moving display of artists paying tribute to people they've lost. If you're in the Detroit area, I'd highly recommend you check it out before it closes in November. Finally, I want to tip my hat to all the hardworking, talented people who keep rolling out of their beds and up to their desks each day to make Destiny 2 a reality. The folks in the trenches never get the appreciation they deserve, and video games are no exception. So for all the players around the world who have felt a little less lonely while running strikes, tearing it up in the Crucible, or grinding raids in the never-ending quest for slightly better gear, I thank you from the bottom of my heart.